I'm James Leach with the Climate Reality Leadership Corps. The Climate Reality Project was founded by Al Gore following his 2006 movie An Inconvenient Truth. One of their primary activities is recruiting and training volunteers like me to speak in our local communities and to get involved in other acts of leadership that will help make their mission a reality. My book, The Sustainable Way, was published in 2016. The subtitle, Straight Talk About Global Warming, What Causes It, Who Denies It, and the Common Sense Transition to Renewable Energy, explains what it's all about. It's a plain-spoken 50-page booklet, a comprehensive source of information covering the science, economics, politics, and technology relating to global warming and renewable energy, and it's easy to find. The book attracted the attention of some climate activists who encouraged me to join the Climate Reality Leadership Corps. There are many thousands of us around the world. If you have an audience seeking information on this topic, be it big or small, you can call on us. When I say big or small, I'm also including one-on-one conversations because talking about climate change is one of the most important things we can do. A few years ago, Climate Reality Talks attracted curious people seeking information about global warming and how it alters the climate and the natural world. These days, Climate Reality presenters will tell you that nearly all who attend our talks are already convinced that global warming is real and a serious problem. As they say, we are mostly preaching to the choir. This presentation is about energizing the choir to take specific actions that will address the climate crisis. To begin, there is a lot of good news. Unlike in 2006 when An Inconvenient Truth was released, we now have practical renewable energy alternatives to fossil fuels that are affordable, stable, and convenient to use. And there is overwhelming evidence that we now have the capability to deploy this technology to transition to renewable sources for all of our energy needs by mid-century. This transition will be a boon to our economy, public health, quality of life, and our overall security. This transition will be far better for the environment and our health. We also understand that we have the ability to restore our damaged climate this century. Switching to renewable energy will be accomplished by being more efficient with the energy we consume and by utilizing the free energy from solar, wind, water, and thermal sources that are all around us, with plenty of energy storage and smart electric grid management to provide a stable energy supply. And there are positive trends like the policies in recent federal legislation encouraging renewables. Many state and local governments have also enacted policies that support more renewable energy and climate-friendly regulations and practices. These are good signs, though it is important to remember that we have a very long way to go and that we are just one election away from seeing this progress derailed. Many leading corporations are shifting to renewable energy and implementing practices that will ensure that their business is on a sustainable path. They are making these changes to lower their cost and reduce financial risk. And there is growing awareness that the future demands a shift toward a more regenerative economy without the extraction and throwaway practices of the past. This recent study out of Stanford University, published in the Royal Society of Chemistry journal, Energy and Environmental Science, explains what the transition by 2035 would cost and how rapidly it would pay off. It includes studies of transitioning for 145 countries. This 2009 cartoon resonates even more today because we actually have solutions ready to deploy. As we now consider our present situation with the knowledge that we can transition to renewable energy at lower cost and with far less environmental harm while simultaneously restoring our climate. The only justification for not creating a better world free of fossil fuels is to further to enrich the fossil fuel industry. Their continuing stranglehold on the global economy will imperil all mankind. To free us from this stranglehold, we need to get focused. There is only one thing we must do. We must nearly eliminate global use of fossil fuels by mid-century. Nothing else we are doing to address global warming or any other cause we may care about will matter if our climate becomes unlivable. If asked what is causing the climate to warm, the answer is our use of fossil fuels. And the only way to prevent a truly catastrophic climate crisis is by stopping these emissions by mid-century. Achieving zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 is a challenging but achievable goal. This transition to renewables will not happen without a level of public support that is well beyond what we have achieved so far. This is an emergency. It demands the complete mobilization of our entire country to marshal our resources to make this global transition a reality. We are all part of the fossil fuel economic complex. The difference is that some are motivated by profit and power, while others, like most of us, are simply using what has been a convenient source of energy. Changing to renewable energy requires that we understand all of these groups. We need to be sensitive to how we provide incentives to help all of us transition to a renewable energy economy. This must be a broadly supported move. Without it, we will not succeed. In addition to focusing our efforts, we also need to get real, because we can't do it alone. This is true as individuals, as a state, and a nation. We need widespread support across our community, our state and nation, and across the globe. To gain a perspective on the scope of our individual contribution to global warming, let's take a look at our emissions here in the U.S. Measured greenhouse gas emissions include those we can calculate based on information such as the amount of fossil fuels we use and other emission sources. It does not include emissions embodied in products we import, emissions we cannot measure or estimate, such as from methane leaking out of abandoned coal mines, or emissions from climate change feedback, such as from drought, wildfires, or melting permafrost. In 2020, the U.S. released 5.981 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, or CO2e. This is nearly 12% of the global emissions. CO2e is a method scientists use to describe the warming effects of all the greenhouse gases relative to carbon dioxide. Our population in 2020 was 330 million. This calculates to 18 metric tons per person, and converting it to pounds, it equals 39,928 pounds of CO2e per person. Looking at it per day, the average daily per capita measured greenhouse gas emission from within the U.S. is about 109 pounds of CO2e. This is nearly 3 times the global number. It includes carbon dioxide, methane, various synthetic gases, mostly refrigerants, and nitrous oxide. Each of the gases is weighted in terms of their global warming impact relative to CO2 to come up with the overall number of expressed CO2e. Here we see a summary from the California Air Resources Board 2022 California Annual Greenhouse Gas Inventory Report for the year 2020. This is an economy-wide analysis of measured greenhouse gas emissions from within California, plus the emissions from imported electricity. California's 2020 CO2e was 369 million metric tons, or just about 6% of the U.S. total. And with a population in 2020 of 39.37 million, California's per capita CO2e is about 57 pounds per day. So why is California's per capita CO2e 52 pounds less than the U.S. as a whole? We do have a higher percentage of renewable energy, but it's mostly because of our mild climate and the fact that we have outsourced most of our manufacturing. The other major difference between the U.S. and California is that California's transportation accounts for a much larger share of the total. Let's take a closer look at the three primary greenhouse gas emission sources that households can directly control: electricity, natural gas, and transportation fuel. The average California household of 3 people has a daily level of 171 pounds of measured CO2e. The average household uses 18.8 kilowatt hours of electricity per day. And with our statewide mix of electricity, each kilowatt hour of electricity from our utilities releases 0.49 pounds of CO2. That amounts to 9.2 pounds of CO2. Now, some who have solar panels or subscribe to community choice electricity suppliers who use renewable energy sources release much less or none at all. But this is the average for California. The average household uses 1 therm, which is 100,000 BTUs of heat of natural gas every day. Each therm releases about 12 pounds of CO2. So the average household using 1 therm of natural gas per day produces 12 pounds of CO2 every day. A typical household driving 40 miles per day using vehicles that achieve 25 miles per gallon, which is our average, will use 1.6 gallons of gasoline. Each gallon of gasoline burned is responsible for about 25 pounds of CO2, 20 pounds directly from burning the fuel, and another 5 pounds of upstream emissions processing and delivering the fuel to us, making the household's daily release from gasoline 40 pounds of CO2. Out of the 171 pounds of CO2 per day, only 61.2 pounds are accounted for from these 3 sources. This means almost 2/3 of the typical California's CO2e emissions are outside of their direct control. So where do the rest of these emissions come from? We have grocery stores and pharmacies, restaurants, schools, hospitals, emergency responders, cement production, lots of construction, a lot of trucks on our roads, utilities, shopping centers, universities, tourism, factories, military operations, agriculture, refineries, mass transportation, and some very big cities. All these entities are using fossil fuels for transportation, space heating, cooling, pumping, machining, processing, etc. The other way to calculate greenhouse gas emissions is based on consumption rather than the measures of emissions in a geographic area. This involves calculating the greenhouse gas emissions embodied in products and services we and all of our supporting businesses and government entities consume. This study from 2016 in the San Francisco Bay Area by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and the UC Berkeley included full product life cycle emissions from production, use, and through disposal. It estimated Marin County consumption-based greenhouse gas emissions of nearly 3 times that of their measured emissions. The overall region's emissions were 35% higher than measured emissions. Applying the regional emissions to the entire state would put California's daily CO2e emissions per person at nearly 80 pounds. Here we see annual global emissions by country. Although the U.S. has historically been the largest greenhouse gas emitter and is responsible for the largest share of the existing buildup of greenhouse gases in the environment, China has become the largest annual emitter, followed by the U.S. Looking at China, we see that their emissions are associated primarily with generating electricity and heat for use in manufacturing and industrial processes. China has become our factory, the world's factory. When we import products from China or any other place, We need to be aware that it is our consumption that is driving their emissions as they manufacture and transport these goods. As consumers, we are responsible for the emissions. So it's true, we can't do it alone. The other part of being focused and getting real is that the U.S. must lead. The United States is responsible for more of the accumulated long-lived greenhouse gases than any other country. Nearly 25% of the accumulated emissions from a country representing just over 4% of global population. This makes the U.S. the largest contributor to global human suffering, environmental damage, and economic harm from climate destabilization. The U.S. has the technologies and resources. The U.S. also has the opportunity to derive immense benefits from the transition, but we must act to make it happen. And California is the innovation and technical leader of the U.S. and the world. If California doesn't show the way, the U.S. won't likely ever lead. A majority in the United States believe climate change is real, and someone needs to do something about it. Just who isn't always so evident. Most aren't acting to do much of anything about it. Last year, the U.S. average miles per gallon actually went down to just under 25 miles per gallon. Fossil fuels still rule our highways. Many don't really know what they can do. They feel trapped with business as usual. There is a divide between attitudes and action. Most of the changes we need to make in our personal households will require preparation. Often there are new electrical requirements and sometimes efficiency improvements. We recently replaced our gas furnace with an electric heat pump. It needed an additional 240-volt, 35-amp circuit. Unfortunately, we had upgraded our electrical service and main breaker box when we had our solar installed, so we just needed to run a new line from the additional circuit breaker. When the old equipment is working just fine, it can be hard to be motivated to make the switch. But don't wait until it fails, because the easiest thing to do is fix what you have or replace it with a similar system. Knowing what we do about the urgency to switch to renewables, the last thing you want to do is install fossil fuel equipment like a furnace, water heater, or range that will likely last 15 to 20 or more years. Large-scale changes, like in commercial facilities and in industry, are of course much more substantial and often involve longer life cycles. This is why it is critically important for industry to have a predictable timeline to plan for the transition. Look at total value over time and not just upfront cost. Purchasing and installing electrified appliances may cost more than replacing a comparable fossil fuel appliance. The long-term payoff for these investments is in energy savings and avoided costs from the effects of pollution and climate change. And don't forget the value of convenience, comfort, and improved health and safety from electrifying everything. As an example, I'm amazed at the low adoption of home solar where I live. There just aren't many opportunities to receive such a good financial return. Is it the upfront investment or lack of knowledge about the payback that is getting in the way of other people installing solar in their homes? When our solar panels were installed 2 years ago, I was expecting 7 years to earn back enough in lower electric bills to recover our investment. As it turned out, with higher electric prices and slightly more production than the contractor had anticipated, our payback will be closer to 6 years. Accounting for it like a business with 20-year straight-line depreciation, it's like spending $700 each year to save over $2,250 each year for 20 years. That adds up to over $31,000 in reduced cost for energy over 20 years, while also significantly reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Accounting for it like a fixed payout 20-year annuity, the annual yield would be a very high 15%. And because electricity prices will likely go up, the actual payout will be much better. Don't expect all contractors, salespeople, or technicians that you may encounter to be informed about renewable and electrification alternatives. They sell and service what they know. Educating them will be a challenge. Look for those who are promoting climate-friendly electrification solutions. In many areas, at least here in California, there are local organizations providing training and certification. If you have a community choice renewable electricity provider, they will likely have a list of certified contractors and may also offer significant rebates. This is a list of the top 20 companies responsible for 1/3 of total carbon dioxide emissions between 1965 and 2017. To be clear, the emissions we're talking about include both their direct emissions from extracting, transporting, and producing the fuels, and those created from the use of the products they have produced. The third company, Gazprom, is a Russian state-owned company we've heard a lot about lately. Here is an accurate quote from this article. Another way to look at it is by country. Here we see the top fossil fuel producing countries, first showing the physical size of each country, and then shifting to size each country by their fossil fuel production based on metric tons of hydrocarbons. This is yet another reason why the U.S. must lead. As the world's largest producer of fossil fuels, if we don't, who will? Those at the top of the fossil fuel industry, whose wealth and power is threatened by a global transition to renewable energy, are doing all they can to continue business as usual and, in fact, to expand the global use of fossil fuels. This is not a level playing field. They represent the greatest fortunes in the world, and they are using it to influence public opinion and to control politicians to bend to their favor. Let's look at their methods. Distraction always favors the fossil fuel industry. As long as most people are focused elsewhere, they win. We have no shortage of distractions that keep climate action from being top of mind. For many decades, they have famously denied that fossil fuels were causing the climate to change. They have spent mightily to discredit the science and to undermine public awareness of the capabilities of renewable energy technology. Now that global warming is obvious and so many recognize it, they have increasingly shifted to tactics to delay change. It takes many forms. They use their power to block renewable subsidies, to increase fossil fuel subsidies, and to dismantle regulations and regulatory agencies like the EPA. Fossil fuel interests are also pushing the notion that it's too late to prevent significant global warming and that switching to renewables is impractical and expensive. Their answer is to adapt, to mitigate, and bet on yet to be invented technologies and just keep on using fossil fuels. As long as the public can be manipulated to pick sides on climate action based on cultural identity and grievance, rather than science and what we can see through our own eyes, climate action can be suppressed. Cultivating division within climate activists themselves is another activity fossil fuel interests have been using to create a wedge in the climate activist movement. So how can we diffuse these efforts intended to divide people on the one cause we should all be supportive of? When you encounter people who show signs of being under the influence of these tactics to divide us, it's helpful to point out that the laws of physics, the laws of nature, apply equally to all people. That climate change is a serious threat to the natural world, the very world that supports all life. And that preventing the climate crisis will take compromise and cooperation. The perfect solution will take many iterations of good steps forward. We are all in this together, and we must all join to achieve this common goal, regardless of our other differences. Casting a wide net means being inclusive and tolerant. Most people aren't talking about climate change. It's been politicized, and politics divides us. I'm very aware of how being part of an organization founded by Al Gore can sometimes be a barrier to break through to many. When I experience this pushback, I point out that there are many of us in the Climate Reality Project who didn't support Al Gore the politician, but who now do support his climate activism because the science tells the truth. Many are afraid of confrontation, ridicule, of exposing their hypocrisy, or simply feel as if they lack the knowledge to respond. Just because you haven't done everything possible to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions doesn't mean you're a hypocrite and not practicing what you preach. As we've seen, we can't do it alone. For those things you haven't done yet to reduce your emissions, have a plan and a schedule. Don't let it stop you from advocating for systemic change. And don't get lost in the weeds. The only knowledge that is important is our use of fossil fuels is releasing massive quantities of greenhouse gases and other pollution into the atmosphere, causing our planet to warm, threatening our lives, and damaging our natural world. Clean renewable energy technology is readily available and completely capable of affordably replacing fossil fuel energy sources. There are many ways to start conversations. It is, of course, the easiest to start with those close to you, like friends, neighbors, family, and people you associate with at work, church, school, and maybe in your volunteer and recreation activities. These relationships are good to test your methods and to develop your communication skills and confidence. Approaching strangers, either at gatherings or in person, can take a little more gumption because those you approach may not be as kind to you as your friends and family. But the payoff is often worth it because you are more likely to encounter people outside the choir of climate believers. Often people will project something in their appearance or behavior that creates an opening. For example, someone idling their fossil fuel vehicle or complaining about high gas prices. If you're in a gathering of people, there is usually a common value that you all share that can be used to open a conversation. Be creative. For example, if you're with a religious group, point out the moral failing of causing so much suffering to others. Or at a wedding, you could offer a toast for a secure and prosperous future, free of fossil fuels and the threat of catastrophic climate destabilization. We all project a persona, some more directly than others. You can wear a slogan on a shirt, hat, or a button like this that says a lot about what's on your mind. This can cause others to respond to you. What you drive or how you power your home can also project a persona that often opens conversations. Questions like, how do you like your EV, or do your solar panels save you money, can start conversations. Or you can just let your feelings out to start a conversation. Statements like, I just love this electric car, or it feels so good to be getting so much free electricity on this sunny day, can create openings to talk more about it. Listen well to discover where the other stands and what they understand. Don't start by putting someone on the defensive. Encourage openness and avoid arguing and public shaming. Be respectful and counter false information with facts or simply by acknowledging that the science says differently. Kindly disagree without being disagreeable. If they ask about what the science has to say, or even better, say something that just isn't so, you now have created an opening to talk more. Studies have shown that only about 1 in 20 individuals are not open to discussing or making changes to address climate change. If you encounter someone who appears to be one, don't fret. If they are truly dismissive, providing facts will not likely change their attitude. But you may be able to win them over through kindness. For many of these people, it is a lack of faith in the science or the fear of something being taken away from them that can be overcome with patience and persistence. Finding common ground, that is, things you both care about, is usually easy. Establishing that climate change threatens the things the other person cares about is usually the challenge. That is where knowledge of climate science comes into the picture. The spectrum of how sensitive people are to causing harm to others is broad. The closer something harmful is to the individual or to their immediate family, the more concerned people tend to be. And for some people, the thought of knowingly causing harm to others, even those they will never personally encounter, is repulsive. The climate destabilization we are already experiencing provides ample examples of harm that is or soon may touch all of us. And because the many ways our use of fossil fuels is harmful is so well established, it's hard to hide behind a rock claiming we didn't know. For many people, especially those active in environmental causes and who revel in the great outdoors, care about protecting the natural world as a strong motivator. This doesn't mean individuals in this group have connected the dots between how our fossil-fueled global economy is threatening the outdoors they so love, or how they could help to prevent it. For example, I know avid bird watchers who don't let their greenhouse gas emissions deter them from traveling far and wide to add to their life list or for a big year. If you establish that a person or a group has an interest in the natural world, you have an opportunity to begin making those connections. Although it may be true that love of money is the root of all evil, we all face the reality of the cost of living, the challenges of achieving financial security, and the spectacle of global wealth inequality. Our use of fossil fuels rather than renewable energy costs us more, makes it harder to accumulate personal wealth, and is driving global wealth inequality. This is fertile common ground for most people. Security has many levels. Having a secure home from the threat of wildfire and extreme weather is a growing concern. Food, water, and economic insecurity are heightened by climate change. The threat of political instability from climate-driven refugees is another. The Defense Department has named climate destabilization a major threat to our national security. Keep it simple. Be both understandable and to the point. Use plain-spoken language the other likely understands. If in doubt, test their understanding to confirm. Example: instead of saying climate change is an existential threat, say climate change threatens our existence. Avoid scientific terminology and measures that could be confusing or hard to relate to. Instead of anthropogenic, you may want to say caused by humans or human-caused. Most Americans don't understand Celsius, so lead with Fahrenheit. And numeric prefixes like giga and mega are hard to grasp, so use something to make the numbers relatable, like I did when I broke down our per capita greenhouse gas emissions to pounds per day. Don't assume everyone understands chemical notation or science concepts like conservation of energy or atomic structure or electromagnetic radiation. Be prepared to get into the details if needed, but keep the focus on simply eliminating all use of fossil fuels and the common sense transition to renewable energy. Be positive. People fear loss and naturally assume that change means the loss of something. When someone expresses a fear of loss, it's okay to acknowledge it if it's real, but respond in a balanced way with the positives. There are plenty of health and environmental benefits from switching to electrification and renewable energy sources. Overall cost, prosperity, wealth. There are many conveniences that are big positives. And of course, a more secure future for all is a powerful positive. These are the steps to start talking about climate change. One final step: ask for action. Many people aren't ready to decide what they should do, so be prepared to help them through the process by continuing the conversation. Try to get them to do something to begin reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, to influence others to take action, and to start taking political action. Let businesses know you care about their greenhouse gas and pollution emissions and those embodied in the products they supply. Ask what they're doing to reduce them. Do they have a sustainability plan you can read? Complain when you see signs of indifference or lack of attention. For example, not using electric vehicles when they could. no solar panels installed in their structures, no EV charging stations where there should be, and no carbon content descriptions on products. Look out for greenwashing. And watch out for companies hiding their lobbying to block climate action through trade associations. Buy climate-friendly products, including those that are locally produced, and divest from companies that are pushing fossil fuels. To influence politicians, you need to make your presence known. Attend their public meetings, send them messages, subscribe to their newsletters, and any other communications they produce. Do these things even when you don't support them. You need to know what they stand for, regardless of their political leaning. Peaceful protests and demonstrations can be a very useful tool to gain publicity and to bring people together. With public officials, ask what climate policies they support. How have they voted on climate policy? Are they out front with their climate stance? Ask how they power their car and home. Do they buy carbon offsets when using fossil fuels, like when they travel? Tell your representatives what you want them to do. If they don't do it, let them know you won't support them. Follow the funding. If a politician is proud of where their funding comes from, they will publicize it. There are sources where you can find out. Support climate-friendly politicians with your contributions and time to campaign for them. Vote and encourage all others to vote. We don't have time to be postponing our climate action. Keep it top of mind and a high priority. This is a title from an opinion piece in the New York Times from a few years ago. We have the tools. Now we must act by building the political power. Please join those who are using their voices, their votes, and their choices to fight the climate crisis. Because your world depends on it. Before closing, I have some current reading to recommend. Michael Mann is a climatologist and geophysicist serving as Director of Earth System Science Center at Pennsylvania State University. He is often the go-to guy you'll see being interviewed about climate change on television. Any of his many books are worth reading. The New Climate Wars describes how fossil fuel interests have and continue to attempt to avoid sweeping policy changes that will significantly reduce the use of fossil fuels. Paul Hawken is an entrepreneur and author who has dedicated his life to environmental sustainability. This book is a fascinating description of the many ways mankind can reduce and draw down our greenhouse gas emissions to accelerate the return of our climate to a more stable norm once we stop using fossil fuels. Mark Jacobson is Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Stanford University and Director of its Atmosphere Energy Program. Professor Jacobson is a world-renowned expert. Although this is a college text, complete with plenty of exercises to support the learning process, it is written in a style that is easy to understand. It demonstrates very clearly that we can affordably transition to 100% clean renewable energy with the technology we already have. We simply need the political will to make it happen. Katherine Hayhoe is an atmospheric scientist and professor of political science at Texas Tech University, where she is director of the Climate Science Center. She is also the chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy. Professor Hayhoe is an evangelical Christian and has been actively speaking to conservative audiences for many years. This book offers especially good guidance about effective communication of climate science and finding common ground to motivate people to act. Thank you for your time and attention.